Okay, we have a few folks joining us. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Gary Williams, and I'm one of the deputy commissioners from the Philadelphia Department of Human Services. Absolutely thrilled to be here today to kick off this webinar on using two very important guides, the Youth and Family Rights Guides. And so you guys should have received this document in advance. This is an opportunity for us to take a deeper dive into these documents and the processes that will drive these documents and kind of really see how this would actually work in our day-to-day practice. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We do have folks still joining us. This is a unique opportunity because we're bringing various providers together that represent different placement types. We have represented today, we have dependent placement, we have delinquent settings, and we have residential facilities, psychiatric residential treatment settings as well. So we are absolutely excited. When I say we, it's the collective of the Philadelphia Department of Human Services, the Department of Behavioral Health, Intellectual Disabilities, as well as CBH. And we also have leadership from and representation from the residential task force that helped us put this together. So thank you to all of you. We are absolutely committed to partnering with you and continuing this collaboration beyond today. And as to start the conversation, an appropriate place to start is introductions. So let me introduce my colleagues from DHS. We have Luis Santiago, who is the administrator for policy and planning. As one of the presenters today, we have Charlene Monroe, who is a senior director of monitoring, evaluations, and quality improvement. We also have with us Casey Thompson, a Stoneley Fellow who's been working alongside of DHS for the last 2 years or so. We also have Latasha Forto. She is a project manager with the Performance Management and Technology Department within DHS. We also have represented from our sister department, CBH. We have Ms. Lauren De La Cava. She is the clinical director for Children's Services, and we have Kristen Vecchio, the clinical coordinator from CBH. We are absolutely excited about having you all here today. We also have a bonus. We have representation from the Youth and Family group represented today. We have Liam and Andre. They are both founding members of the Young Adults Leadership Committee. And we also have Melody Jackson. She is a family specialist from Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities. And so before I turn it over to Lauren for some opening remarks, I just want to share our appreciation for your involvement in this webinar today. We are absolutely thrilled to have you. This is very important work, and we could not do this without you. And so, as you all know, all youth deserve compassionate, safe, and therapeutic care on their roads towards resiliency and success in life. And we certainly could not do that without you. So thank you so much. And without any further ado, I'll bring Lauren to the front to have some opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And it's great to have all of you here today. We are really excited here at CBH to be doing this work collaboratively with DHS, with the Managing Director's Office, and especially having youth and family at the forefront. I just want to add our acknowledgement and appreciation for the ongoing efforts that you've made, particularly during COVID, which has been difficult, but really at all times to uphold high levels of care for the youth at your facilities, and all the ways that you've already incorporated the sharing of the rights and grievance processes into your communications with youth. And however, we've had conversations with youth and families as a part of the forums in the task force. And it was clear during those conversations that there was a disconnect that youth and family members mentioned being unaware of or didn't remember understanding their rights or how they were worded. And that's what brings us to some of the work you're going to hear about today.
As one of your fellow providers said during a review session of these guides, even though sharing rights with the youth is not new, it is clear that it was not effective in the past. So now we need to be changing the thought about how we are relaying this information to our youth so they are aware. Additionally, youth in care often have many players involved in their care, which can be difficult for even the adults in their lives to sort through. And importantly, youth and families wanted to know who they could turn to both inside and outside of the facility for help when they needed it.
Okay. So I want to just say a word. I have referenced the residential task force earlier, and in 2018, the city council commissioned this task force to take a closer look at child welfare operations across the system. And as a result of their work, they came up with 19 recommendations. One of the recommendations we are presenting to you, it is coming to fruition on today. Alongside of this, there's a lot of other work that's being done, but we are certainly happy to have this conversation with you today regarding two complementary guides. You have one that is for youth specific, and then you have one for family members. These guides actually detail the rights of the youth while in residential care. It also captures the treatment plan that the treatment members of that team that are responsible for the care of that young person. And it also provides guidance on issuing and facilitating grievances if that becomes necessary. The youth and family members on the task force were enthusiastic and hopeful about this specific recommendation because it informs the practice and makes the system better for young people and families that will come behind them. And so we're glad to have their voices a part of this process. And as we advance to the next slide, it's the agenda for the webinar. And the agenda is pretty straightforward. We will provide, we've done welcome and introductions. We will also provide some background on the guides, the purpose, the intent of these particular documents. We'll also spend some time highlighting specific content in each of the documents for your consideration and review. We'll also provide some strategies for implementing these documents within your various agencies. And we absolutely are in support of you integrating this practice in your various respective agencies. So without any further ado, we'll jump right in. We'll also have some time for Q&A, so absolutely use the chat if you wish, but we will have some time for Q&A towards the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll bring Luis Santiago to the floor.
Luis, you might want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. So the virtual norms, we pretty much appreciate your time here. And this meeting is a webinar style, as you are aware, which is mean that only the presenters will have the microphone and camera access. A question and answer box is at the bottom of your screen, and question will be moderated and answered by our panelists. When you ask a question in the chat box, please include your name and affiliation. The webinar will be recorded so that you may share it with other staff who may provide the guides to youth and families or provide direct care services to the youth. Now we're going to discuss the goals for the webinar. So you can see the goals for the webinar showing here on the screen. Overall, we hope that by the end of the webinar, you feel very confident in the context of these guides, the purpose and ways that you can use them to support our mutual goals for safe, informed, and quality care. Understanding the guides, we will cover the rationale, the content, and helping hand for youth residential placement. Understand the expectations and suggestions for implementation, and we're going to answer questions about the guys. I hand it to Kristen now.
Okay, thank you. We are grateful to Liam and Andre, youth representatives, and Melody, a family member representative, for joining us today and being willing to share about their experiences and the guides from their perspectives. Youth and family well-being is at the core of the work we do daily, and their expertise and ideas are key to providing quality services. Liam, Andre, and Melody, thank you so much for joining us. Melody, can we start with you?
Certainly can. Do you want me to go forth with the questions? Okay. So, hi, everyone. I'm Melody Jackson, a family member. I have a lot of lived experience raising my child who had some challenges, behavioral, mental health, but also RTF involvement and experiences. So one of the things, one of the questions here, and I'll address that, is what was going through your head when you first interacted with the group home and or your child where your child stayed? And did you feel like you got information you needed to feel comfortable or could ask the questions you wanted to ask? So the things that went through my head upon our first experience with an RTF was, where was my son going? Who was going to be taking care of him? Was someone going to really care for him? Could they love him the way I love him? What if he gets sick? And a lot of those questions. But was he going to be treated kindly? Would people understand his behaviors? And if not, would he get hurt? Because at one point he was diagnosed with an intermittent explosive disorder. So those are some of the things that went through my head. It was the first time my son had stayed away from home, that anyone else had to care for him. So I was afraid. I was very afraid, and it was very traumatic for both of us. Going home that night and he wasn't in his room. So I got information, but I got basic information. And when you're first going through this experience, you're there with a lot of anxiety and just, it's a very scary situation. So I felt as though after the fact, too much was shared with me because I couldn't retain it at that time. I was just worrying about my son. But information was shared, and I was, I had to be comfortable with what I got because I didn't know what else I might need. So I thought that would be adequate for now. And then asking the questions, there were some questions that I did get the opportunity to ask, but once I had calmed down and I was home and I could really reflect, I had a lot more questions. The questions really came to me. And then it was not as easy to get to someone to get answers to those, but I was persistent until I did speak with someone, and also had to find out who I should be calling with these questions. So that was kind of how that looked for me. And what things or topics do you wish had been part of the first conversation with the staff? Pretty much, I wish someone had asked me how I was feeling. That's number one. I wish someone had asked me, how are you doing, Ms. Jackson? How is this, how is this affecting you? And maybe even had some ideas of some supports for me. And other things I wished I was asked, really more about my son. It was basic things. You do get the questions, if you have any allergies, things like that, but more about his personality, his characteristics. Those types of things I would have loved to have had an opportunity to share, because the behaviors didn't identify him as a person. There was a lot more to him. And the only thing, one of the questions is, what would I like to share with providers and staff about family and youth rights, or why using the guide is important? If we know our rights, we are empowered. And if we are empowered, we can be an extremely strong team player when it comes to our children. We are our children's best advocate, and we know them better than anybody else. So the more we know and the more we're informed, then the better we can provide support for even the providers that are trying to help our children. So I could go on forever, but those are just some of the answers that come to mind for me. You want me to do the other ones too?
No, you're good. We can turn it over to Andre and Liam to share their perspective. Thank you so much, Melody.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So yeah, as I was introduced, I'm Andre, a founder member of the YLC. And just a little background about myself and youth and family experience and perspective. It really sort of narrows down to just the transparency component for me. Going into this field can often be like completely mind-boggling, confusing. It's nerve-wracking. There's so many things that just sort of change just in the experience of becoming or being placed into this sort of situation. And I think the guide really will help to sort of mend some of those gaps. So I know when I personally went in, some of the things that I were expecting, or all of the things that I were expecting, were just completely wrong, just from a standpoint of how things operated, because, no one can really prepare you for this. And I think that's really the focal point of what we're trying to do now, is because from the perspective of someone that's been through that, you can't really have someone exactly holding your hand through it all, because you don't exactly know what your situation is in terms of from the agency side of it. So it's very, very useful to have some sort of concrete guides that sort of help you understand the core of how everything works, and what your rights and what your abilities are and capabilities are, who your access points and who you sort of reach out to when you need things are. So I think this will make for a very useful, tangible thing to have. And I think that'll just increase efficiency from not only the agency side, but then from the perspective of those that are being most affected and need the help from this work.
Yeah. Hi, folks. To tag on to what Andre said, I'm Liam, pronouns he, him, also from the Young Adult Leadership Committee. And just a little bit of context, the committee really focuses on systems work related to any young person in any system that they touch or may touch. So intersecting systems, homelessness, child welfare, juvenile justice. And my personal experience in the just residential placements were not the most negative, if that makes sense, but I did hear stories and experiences of my peers, which kind of motivated me to join the work and then collaborate with system leaders and administrations to kind of find like different solutions. So some of those conversations we took away from on the committee level was that young people didn't really have that self-agency or knowledge of what they could do, which didn't make their stay very positive. So when Victoria and her team at the managing director's office came to us as the committee to get our input on this guide, we really felt that this was going to be a good process. So my hope and goals for everyone here to, when using this tool, to be confident that it really does have that youth perspective, not only what's in it and what's included, but how we can use it. Because if we take it and use it in the way that it was intended, which we'll learn about a little bit later, we honestly believe that it will continuously improve the system that youth travel throughout on their journey and pathway to adulthood. So I'm just really excited that it's finally ready, and I hope to share more in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Melody, Andre, and Liam, for sharing your experiences and comments on the guides. We hope that as this presentation continues and the guides are used, we'll all hold your words in mind. In addition to the comments you just heard, other comments from youth about the guides are shown on the screen. If you heard you would get a rights guide, what do you hope it would be like? Can we see it more than once? Like repetition is important. Have a follow-up meeting to review it again? I'd want it immediately, but also for someone to go over it again. Having this knowledge and awareness would have helped me cope with my transition into the group home. That it would give me an idea on what the laws were, what was allowed, knowing that would help me feel comfortable and supportive. With the information about how they are to be treated and what to expect, the guides facilitate feelings of safety and emotional regulation. With the page on their care team and contact information, youth and families are reminded that a web of loved ones and supporters surround them. And with the acknowledgement and time to review information about their rights with them, youth and families are shown respect and that their well-being matters in your care right from the beginning.
I'm going to give a little background on the task force and where these recommendations came from. So in 2018, Philadelphia City Council, along with city government and stakeholders, created the Youth Residential Placement Task Force. I'm just going to call it the task force. This group of 25 system leaders and advocates met for over a year to review the circumstances that lead to placement and conditions within residential facilities. In November 2019, the task force released a final report with recommendations for changes in expectations, both internally and with residential provider partners. The report specifically contained 19 recommendations in 5 areas of work: system level improvements, reducing the use, improving the safety, improving the quality, and improving educational equality. These guides fulfill a specific recommendation in the quality section to create these youth and family-friendly documents. The content of these guides came primarily from 3 sources: the PA Law Code 3800 regulations for residential placement, under which all providers are licensed, Philadelphia Department of Human Services contract scope, and community behavioral health performance standards. The statements listed in the guides are supported by legal precedents, except for statements leading with "I can ask" or "should," which are encouraged as best practice but not mandatory. Along the way, feedback from focus groups with youth, family members, and providers was also incorporated in line with the applicable regulations and agency expectations. This close collaboration with individuals with lived experiences with the residential placement system provided valuable insights and suggestions. These suggestions allow the text to reflect the areas youth and family members want the most information on, as well as present the information in ways that work for them. These youth and family rights guides are meant to empower youth and families to know, understand, and articulate their rights and contexts while in a residential facility. Throughout the drafting process, we heard comments and suggestions on how to improve these guides for accessibility and clarity. These guides will also help provide transparency for youth and families about how their care should look. As a result of receiving the guides and as an outcome of their continued use and presence on site, the guides will contribute to multiple outcomes. Liam, Andre, and Melody will share the hopes for the guides' impact for youth and families. Liam, do you want to start with what your hopes are?
Yeah, sorry about that. I kind of couldn't hit the button. Technical
No
difficulty.
worries.
But yeah, thank you. So the hope, just that first one there, for young people to feel supported, respected, safe, and informed. Again, a lot of the conversations we had on that committee level, we visit different excuse me, young people throughout the city. We host focus groups, and a lot of the feedback we got was that there was not a good way for them to communicate those feelings to people in some of the places that they stayed. So the hope is that this guy will inform them of, like, I believe in one of the sections, there's a place where you can put the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like the person who, the terminology is losing me, but there's a place where you have context in the guide and you can contact people. So that's just one of the many ways that we can use this to ensure young people feel supported while they're in these places. And I think another way to keep the young people informed is that they'll have their own copy. And that was another thought, because you don't want to always have to ask for things. Sometimes young people don't feel just safe or even like the culture in the place where they may be may not invite them to just ask questions. So having that guide also provides in real time answers to questions and just concerns. And hopefully, like we said, in this way, it can be used.
Great. Thank you, Liam. Andre, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes. So speaking specifically from sort of a family lens now, I think when we talk about being respected and informed on the part of the child's care, I think the guide really plays an essential part in that, because there's only so much that you can like sort of physically tell someone in the moment. And as these things are occurring, you're going to want to sit down and sort of like really engage and be able to digest at your own pace what you're reading through. And if you have any other concerns, maybe it can be addressed there in a way that would be more useful than just sort of, you know, going through and asking a question at the moment that everything is raised, because of just sort of the nature of how information can just, you know, sort of be perceived in this sort of work.
Great. Thank you, Andre. Melody, do you want to share from a family member's perspective what your hopes are for the guide? I think you're muted, Melody.
I have to say ditto to what Andre and Liam shared. My hopes is that it will make the transition of a child who has to now be separated from their parent a lot easier, or somewhat easier, because they have a better understanding of where they're going, why they're going, and how they're going. And it will give the parent something tangible that I can really, you know, touch and I can see and I can read and I can learn about what my rights are, but not only what my rights are, but what the rights of the provider are. And I think it will help the providers even in this transition, because I can imagine that because they do this work all the time, each time a new child comes, there's got to be anxiety that comes with that as well. You know, are we going to be able to help this child, and are things going to go well? So my hopes is that it helps everyone to be able to own the moment and embrace the moment, but you know, with everyone knowing some of the same information. I didn't know what to ask. You know, I didn't know what to ask. Not so much could I ask, but what do I ask? I don't know what to ask. So this would give me some pointers that would be able to kind of trigger some thoughts for me, and really allow me to I'm always saying me, but allow a parent to get more involved in the treatment with their child. So I think it's across the board, the transparency is going to be make things so much better. It's not going to be a us and them, but it could be a we. You know, we're together. We're going to do this together with your child. You'll be the team player as well. And I just take some of the anxiety out of it, and I think it will help the whole process and help our children as well. Because if I know I can be a part of this process with my child, then I don't feel like I've lost him for that time. I just feel like, he's got to go away for a minute, but I still can be there and be a part of his life at the placement. So overall, just helping everyone, the provider, the parent, and the child, being informed about the same things. Then I can have a conversation about these things. And I might have better questions, and the provider will understand, that I need to be educated. It's important. The one thing that was not shared with me was, what are you doing with my child that's helping him? Because I need to know that too, because he's got to come home. But I didn't know to ask that question at first. I mean, later on I did, but we just don't know. So I just think it'll help across the board, and as well as staff,
Right. Thank you, Melody, and thank you, Liam and Andre, for sharing what your hopes are for the impact of this guide. And we certainly hope that that is one of the outcomes, or all of these outcomes, come to fruition as a result. We also heard from providers and from staff, and I wanted to share some of the feedback we received around their hopes and how they anticipate these guides will help. Providers felt like the guides would contribute to meeting targets for providing high quality of care to youth and families, and building a supportive culture and adhering to licensing standards at the facilities. For staff, we heard that it would be really helpful to have common language and knowledge to communicate with the youth and families, and that they would be responding to fewer behavioral challenges on account of the youth having access to information, which would ease their anxiety around unknowns and safety, which can contribute to difficulty in the milieu at times. So these are really what we are hoping to see come out of the implementation of these guides. And I'm going to hand it over now to Luis, who's going to talk about implementation.
Thank you. And for a minute, I wanted to share an analogy with you so we can then switch gears to the implementation guide. And I want you to imagine, because when two devices want to successfully communicate, both devices must agree to use and follow some rules about the way that they will do it. And this communication is going to ultimately help each other. And imagine what would happen if each one of them used different communications or rules. What would happen then? So now I want to shift gears onto the expectations around using these guides and their components, including suggestions from your peers on ways to include the guides into your facility flow. In terms for DHS providers and DHS staff, pretty shortly in the next few days, probably today, tomorrow, by next week, you will be getting a memo regarding the guidance of these guides. And for CBH, you will be getting a bulletin, and this will be sending shortly, and will include CBH specific timelines for implementation. We're not going to go over those documents in time today. However, we're going to discuss some of the important and highlight parts in terms of the memo and the bulletin. And number one is the use. So as January the 1st, 2021, these specific guides are required to be provided and reviewed with the youth and the family, and re-review with the youth. We emphasize review and re-review as a key acts that came from the youth and the family group. So meaning they urge providers and staff to engage them in conversations about the right, so as to help them understand the information the guides contain. Youth are not to simply be given the guides and instructed to read it or interpret them on their own. Staff should sit down with them and go over thoroughly and answer any questions. Another important part of the bulletin or the memo is the timing. where we're asking that the youth should receive these documents within the first 3 hours. 3 hours of arriving at the placement, followed by a full and detailed explanation of the guide within the first 24 hours of arriving at the facility. Going over these documents should be incorporated into the admission process as welcoming and empowering tool for the youth and families. Another important is the documentation. The final page of the rights guide contains the documentation of receive and review, page which must be filled out by those present for the conversation with the guides were discussed. In addition, the case notes, important, the case notes should document that the guide was discussed with the youth and the family members. The facility should copy this page and include it in the child files, allowing the youth to keep the original copy of the guide. In addition, it is important that the youth have access to this guide. Bearing any safety concerns, youth must be allowed to keep their copy of the guide with them, which is include access to my team page, and we're later going to talk about that, of contact numbers and grievance process chart. This is so the youth feel comfortable having their personal copy to reference and support their sense of safety. Repeated exposure. Within the first week of arrival, checking with the new youth to offer additional opportunity to ask questions about the RISE guide. Repeat exposure to the youth right help keep the RISE relevant and ingrained in a facility culture. And you should use a supportive group model to facilitate the frequent review of rights in youth-friendly terms and activities. The environment. The youth and family must be allowed to advocate for themselves using these documents that may not be retaliated against for questions or exercising the right within the guides. And last but not least, the staff. Your staff are on the front line of service every day, and the ones that carry on direct services to the youth. Facility directs to ensure that all staff working with the youth are familiar with the document and its contents, and that staff reviewing the document at intake have detailed knowledge of the document and youth and family rights. So I handle it now to Casey.
Great. So you started to get a feel for how valuable the input and insights of young people who have experienced care as well as family members were in the development of the guide content, as well as how it would be used. We also saw a lot of overlap with the provider input that we got about how the guides might be implemented and some ways that this could be incorporated into practice. So Melanie, Liam, and Andre are going to share a couple more examples, as you see here on the slides, of ideas that came up across both of those conversations as to implementation. So Melanie, you want to lead us off there? Melody, sorry. And you're, oh, there you go.
So here we have provide staff training on the guides as part of onboarding. I think that's important. Has to go on consistently because staff is, you have overturn of staff all the time. I think the important point is that everybody be on the same page as much as possible when it comes to all staff. Family and youth peers present for explaining the guide. My vision has always been to have a family peer specialist on staff for all child serving systems. For those of us who have lived experience to be able to support another parent or parents or caregivers or guardians. It helps in such a great way. It takes the responsibility off of the provider directly, but also the family peer specialist would be a part of that, that agency, but can meet with each and every parent if needed to just to talk about their experience and then give them some insight on what's going to happen, what may happen during their child's stay there. And also that would be the go-to person for the parents if anything occurred, they had questions, things like that. Posted guides in common areas, they should be posted everywhere. So children and even staff can remind themselves of something. They may say, I don't remember what it said about this. And they can, they can get the information on their own and not have to constantly ask for someone and ask for the information. Hold ongoing education sessions on the guides for youth as a check-in. And that's an excellent idea because the first 2 weeks or so, some of what occurred, we don't even remember because of the anxiety and the transition and things like that. So for the children and youth being able to consistently get this information is empowering for them. And it's helpful for the staff. And to incorporate into house meetings regularly, naturally, definitely have to have that happen. Again, having our youth all on the same page. They all know have the same information. It's just a big plus. And add into guardian and youth intake handbooks. Sure, it's a wonderful idea. Why not add it in? And there's a whole lot of other things that I can think of, but for right now, this is a good start. I really think this is going to be a good start, and I'm excited about this. I've been thinking of it and talking about it for many years. So it's wonderful to see it in action now.
Fantastic. And these are some of the examples of how we will begin to implement, what is really a reflection of our shared commitment, provider system, and our representatives here to improving the quality of care, and that we believe that by building the youth and family understanding of what their rights are, that we'll be able together strengthen the effectiveness of services. And so we have a second here for question. And so I will pass to Victoria. Gwen, we do have, the guides will be available in Spanish. That's what we've got so far. If there are large other language populations, we can talk more about translation line assistance. There was another question about the timeline for emergency after hours. I'm looking that up in the policy. And Luis may be able to offer that. I think we may not have specified, but similar to a lot of the general guidance, the idea is kind of to try to do an initial quick review upon arrival and then go deeper once, within that first 24 hours. So I think similarly, if it's the middle of the night, to know that, hey, we're going to go over your guides more in the morning is okay, but we will double check that clarification. And I see a question from Carolyn Connolly also about monitoring. And so at least on the DHS side, CBH can speak to theirs. As Luis had mentioned, the documentation of receipt signature page will be required, and that should be kept in your file that PMT may check on. And then also that should be shared with the case manager. And so that is what we have intended on the DHS side. I'm not sure for CBH folks.
I can speak to CBH and also just to let our CBH providers know that there'll be a bulletin issued tomorrow that will include CBH's timeframes for implementation and reflect an update of the performance standards to include the requirements around the rights guide. Our monitoring plan will be, this will be integrated into our youth interviews and also things we may discuss at our treatment team meetings. And then anytime we're doing chart review, we'll also be looking to see the documentation that it was reviewed.
Great, thanks. Just a couple more questions that we got ahead of time for the panelists. Do we need to share these guides just with the youth that are new to placement with us starting in January? Or are we also expected to give every youth a copy?
So for CBH, we are expecting that it goes to every youth. We have, and I'll preview the bulletin for you. We are expecting this to begin implementation with any new admissions starting January 15th of 2021. And we are expecting that by the end of February 2021, that all youth who were admitted prior to the start date receive the guides. There's also a time frame there to make sure that all staff are trained on the guides.
For DHS, we also would expect and work with you all in terms of having a phased-in approach that every young person at your facility would actually be presented with a guide along with their family members. In terms of the timeline, we would actually have to refer to the bulletin or the email that will go out to all of you. But there is an absolute expectation that every young person under our care receive a guide along with their family members. Thank you.
Okay, great. Another question. Are the guides going to be provided to the family and the youth at the time of referral to a residential facility by CBH and or DHS so they know their rights prior to placement? Or is it only after the youth is already referred, accepted, and placed in a residential facility that you want the guides to be given?
I can take that. So once the youth is placed in the residential placement, that's when the guide should be reviewed.
You can certainly include review of the guides and rights as a part of any pre-admission engagement that you do with a family. We talked a lot about discussion with youth and families around expectations prior to their date of placement. So you can certainly include that as well. And it's also on CBH's website.
Yes.
On CBH's website.
Sorry, Lauren. Yes, for DHS, we also, we're actually having orientations and trainings for COOA case managers as well as DHS staff. And so the intent is for the guidelines to be provided in real time, but there is a responsibility from the case manager who is actually driving the case management work. And so the intent is that the guide would be provided to youth and families real time, and the COOA case manager has a role and responsibility to help facilitate that as well. So alongside of this training, we've done multiple presentations internal to DHS leadership and case management teams, and we have technical assistance on site at the various COOAs, community umbrella agencies.
And also wanted to add to what Gary indicated, that it's already both guides are available on DHS forums and also in DHS Connect. And we're going to upload, there's two versions, one that you can print it out. It's for printing purposes, and the other one is a virtual one for a Word document.
Great. Thank you. And I see a couple more questions came in. We do have further time throughout the presentation for more questions, as well as a longer Q&A at the end. So we take your questions that came in, as well as if we don't get a chance to address any today live, there will be a follow-up frequently asked questions document for you to refer to. So plenty of time to ask all the questions that you need. But we're going to kick it off now over to some of the specific rights that are in the guide. Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. Thanks, Victoria. So yeah, now for the main event, to look at kind of how the guide is laid out and the content. We know that most of you were already sharing some version of rights documentation with the youth. These versions cover the same regulations with additional emphasis in response to some of the areas we had gotten feedback, based on the youth and family perspective, or some areas that may be less familiar. And so all of the specific language was reviewed by DHS and CBH legal departments. As we had kind of mentioned early on, those areas that say should or can I are best practices, as opposed to the those that are the musts. And so, Carolyn, if we can go on to the next one. So to get a feel for, obviously there's some differential in what are the rights of the young people and those of the family, although also some strong overlap. And so these are two distinct guides that have complementary areas within those. And so there are 7 sections in the youth guide which are not included in the family guide, and a lot of those have to deal with the nuts and bolts of daily life in the facility. And then we also were very conscientious about, for child welfare cases, the family rights and what some of those implications may be. And so as you see, kind of the key focus on the family rights are really about being part of that treatment planning and making sure that there are connections and information that are flowing, as well as kind of a shared commitment around making sure everyone is informed of the grievance procedures. And now pass to Kristen.
Thank you. Okay, what to expect on the following slides. The upcoming slides will go over each section of the rights guide with a focus on the youth content. We'll be showing you what the pages from the actual guides look like. The guides were emailed prior to this webinar, but you can also find them at the link on the screen. We'll pause at the beginning of each slide for you to skim the text. We won't discuss each bullet point on the guide, but rather highlights and provide more context around a few from each page. Why am I getting this youth rights guide? Right from the start, it's important for youth and families to have an orientation to this document and why it matters to them. Youth and families have the right to know the rules for how they must be treated while receiving services at your facility so that their rights are upheld and protected. The guide is for youth in any residential placement across the dependent, delinquent, and psychiatric treatment facilities. However, it does not apply to state secure delinquent placements because they are not licensed under the 3800 regulations, though we encourage the state to adopt them for all youth. It is also important for youth to know their rights so that they can ask for what they need. The disruption of being placed in residential placement can be traumatic and be a great time of uncertainty for youth. Concrete, accessible information about how their physical and emotional needs must be protected can provide certainty in an otherwise turbulent situation. The more information a youth has, the more they can feel safe and able to participate in services securely. How should I use this guide? This section helps make the guides relevant to youth and family members so they see how it can help them. The statements here focus on information access and self-advocacy. And I'll turn it over to Luis.
Thank you. About me. The About Me page was specifically requested by the youth advocates as a way to start building a relationship with facility staff and sharing part of their identities. It offers the youth the opportunity to feel seen and validated at entry to care. This is the chance to talk with the youth about things that are important to them and help the youth feel supported. Ideally, it should be filed together during the review session, but you can ask the youth if they rather keep the information private and work on it alone. My team. The youth and families have shared difficulties they may face knowing who to contact regarding their case, especially given potential changes in the assigned case manager. Given changes that may occur in case management, staff and multiple support roles, having contact information for all relevant parties in one place help the youth and family know who to contact and who support them. As you can see in the page, list name and contact information for case managers and other key professionals. They also include case managers, supervisors, any treatment team, or juvenile probation officer, as well as education. Providers should review information regarding additional team members as a part of the intake packet. May require some follow-up to fill out. If there is a designated education decision-making, the Education Support Center can help identify that information as a part of the ESSA console after placement. This contact information is included in the implementation memo / bulletin that you guys will receive. It is important to remember to talk to the youth about who the people on their team are and what role they play while it's filled out together. There is a space to check off with the youth who is on their team, as not every youth has every member listed. Now I'll pass to Lauren.
We'll start with, what are my rights? So this page builds from the page explaining why they're receiving the guides. And it lets you know what a right is about their rights to information access. In this section, we want to highlight the importance of each statement. So the first statement offers definition to a youth of what it is meant by right throughout the guide. As one of the youth quoted earlier said, youth want to know and have the right to know how they are legally protected while in care. And they should also know the areas that we at DHS and CBH are encouraging but not requiring. The majority of statements, though, again, are backed by legal protections. The next statement, I do not have to earn my rights or get them as a reward, especially communicating with family. This appears to be a straightforward right, but we want to bring it to your attention as it's the importance of adhering to this. It was one of the most important concerns for youth and their family members, particularly for their communication rights. Youth must have access to anything that is a right of theirs covered in this guide, regardless of behavior. Maintaining and supporting a youth's healthy connections to family members is critical to their well-being and is not allowed to be withheld or earned based on behavior. The next page is being informed. So youth must receive a paper copy. Youth and their guardians must receive and be walked through the guide and the grievance process specific to your facility. That means reading through each statement with the youth as opposed to picking and choosing highlights as we are doing today. If a family member is not present at the time of admission, residential facility staff are responsible for providing the guides either via email or mail. This is followed by making multiple contact attempts to discuss the guides via phone. Consider incorporating the guides into a welcome packet. In review sessions, youth displayed anxiety around not knowing what to expect around room or personal body searches. So that's why it's important that the facilities share rules for item and person searches. They must receive the rules from your facility, and of course, those rules must comply with policies and protections, such as protection from unreasonable search and seizure. I'm going to pass it to Luis.
knowing how to make a grievance complaint. Youth and their family members need to know how they can share their opinions or get help. Knowing how to raise that concern and get assistance, especially when something happened that makes the youth unsafe or feel unsafe, are common challenges here from the youth and their families. Of course, one of the most important rights people have is able to share this opinion or experiences without feeling retaliation from a staff, from facility leaders, or other youth. It is critical to listen to the youth's descriptions of their concerns or incidents in a non-objective way in order to find out resolutions that honors the youth needs and safety. You may underreport concerns because they fear, youth may underreport concerns, because they fear this retaliation and delayed in unification or placement change. To the best of your ability, please, you should help the youth understand the precautions that are in place to prevent these concerns from happening if they report. The youth may need assistance in writing a grievance, and they must be allowed access to those who can help them complete it, such as a case manager or guardian who files on their behalf. If a youth is reporting a concern, it's possible that they feel alarmed while doing so, which is why it is important for the youth. They have privacy and multiple choices when reporting their concerns. The facilities should continue to encourage day-to-day feedback on activities, foods, etc., and in-house resolution of the youth or family concerns. This is while also supporting a culture where the youth and staff know the avenues that safety concerns can be addressed if they need additional or outside support. While facilities have their own internal procedures, youth and family need to have contact information accessible for other avenues available to them, which is highlighted in the chart on the next slide. I'm going to allow you, this is the grievance chart, and I'm going to allow you a minute so you can take a deep look, and then I will go over the most important points of it. Right. So the chart covered various types and severity of concerns, pointing youth and family members to who they could contact. For this, the contact information in the My Team section can serve for reference. The chart it's meant to be read from top to bottom, from what's happening to who to ask for help, to ways to get help, and it moves in intensity of problem from left to right. However, any step or contact can be made at any point by a youth or family member. Depending on whether the youth or family is placed at your facility from either DHS or CBH side, there's different contact numbers. So we suggest pointing out to the youth, such as using a highlighter or circling which contacts apply to them. You notice that youth and families are provided with options on ways they can get help as shown with the icons. During review of the chart, just make sure to point out how they can access each means. As this can be a challenging concept to grasp, reviewing it, this paper copy and your facility process with youth are important to helping them feel comfort and empowered, knowing that they have that information available if it's needed. So now I'll pass it to Kristen.
Being treated in a fair and respectful way. This next section of the Youth Rights Guide is titled Being Treated in a Fair and Respectful Way. This section outlines how youth should be treated with specific protections to ensure youth are safe from harm, both physically and mentally. The rights articulated in this section of the Youth Guide are fundamental to the goals of these guides as a whole. We know that as providers, these values are integral to your work with youth. Today, we want to emphasize a few of them. We know that youth that enter your care come from a variety of backgrounds. Respect was a theme that stood out from conversations with those with lived experience. Youth and family members may display challenging behaviors and some attitudes at times, but must always have their identities respected. Discipline must not be harmful. They must not experience additional trauma while they are to be protected in your care. The facility must provide safe housing for me in a way that affirms my gender expression. Affirming youth gender identity is critical to all aspects of their well-being. We recognize that this can present some logistical challenges, yet youth psychological well-being must drive all aspects of care. There is also space on the About Me page to discuss a youth's preferred pronouns to help start this discussion. Next slide. So this is a continuation of being treated in a fair and respectful way. I'll give a few moments to review this. We won't go into detail on this slide as everyone on this call knows avoiding all forms of abuse and neglect is fundamental, and its repercussions are serious for all involved. Youth are always to be protected from abuse from anyone on site in any form. When explaining this page to youth, explain that anyone means peers, aides, staff, and any other person. Assure youth that their reports will be taken seriously. During review, make sure that each type of potential abuse is explained and reiterated that if something feels uncomfortable or wrong, they should speak up. And now we'll take some time for questions.
Yep, so we'll keep the questions in this section related to this last chunk of slides we just covered. So we had a question regarding page 4, the My Child's team. Is there a way we can get all the team members' names? Often we don't get the child advocates, judges, education decision makers information in a timely manner. We touched on this briefly, but if anyone from the team wanted to expand on that.
Yes, Victoria, I just wanted to reiterate that this is a collaborative effort. Everyone who actually comes into contact with a young person is responsible. And so when I emphasize the importance of the core case manager and DHS staff in instances where we're facilitating placements after hours on the hotline, that the case manager should be able to drive and provide that information. And so alongside of this, we're working with the COOs to make sure that they know their role in this process as well. And so we're not looking at this as just a provider responsibility, although you have a specific role in this process because you are actually caring for the young person and the young person is at your facility. And so this is why, to the next question, I think that's in the chat, this is why there's a level of responsibility that the providers have as well to incorporate this into your practice. So again, it should happen in real time, and it should be a reiteration of or review of the document periodically during the length of stay.
And just to add a detail on the education information, EDMs were mentioned specifically. There is contact information for the Education and Support Center that will come out in the DHS bulletin. So at least for those child welfare placements, you can contact them to look more in depth to find the education decision maker. And then all of the CUAs did hear about these guides coming, and that one of the key roles that they can do is make sure that as much of the contact information is up to date when they send over the placement referral, so that you all are getting more of that. So that will be, an area for ongoing collaboration and problem solving too. But those are some of the initial steps.
Great, thank you. And then another question we had related to the grievance process that was outlined. My facility has its own grievance process that we want to keep using. With these new guides, are we allowed to keep using our process too?
I can speak to that. Yes, so we are encouraging you to continue using your any policy protocols that you have with respect to your own guidance, but in addition, you must use these family guides.
Great, and I think just to elaborate on that answer too, the guides in the chart and the guides also give additional information on how youth can access help outside of your facility. That's one thing that we heard from the youth, that they wanted to know the process at your placement. That's often the quickest way to resolve minor issues, but also they were curious to know how they could get help from DHS or CBH, for instance. And it looks like that's all the questions we have relevant to this most recent section. Any others we'll continue to address at the end. Thank you so much. I think Lauren, you're next.
So having a plan at the facility. So plans of care are an essential component of your everyday work with youth and outline the trajectory of service and future planning. Since the plan dictates much of the youth's lives over an extended period, they and their guardians have the right to be actively involved as decision makers, with their input being a driver to the plan. Youth should also be assured that these plans are malleable and subject to change if something is not working. Youth can feel less anxious in your care when they have some idea of why they are there and when they will leave. Those answers aren't always easy or clear, but should be shared with a great deal of sensitivity. If possible, providers should reference specific timelines for youth to look forward to. This could include discharge planning, treatment plans, or other goals. With the goal of having residential placements serve as short-term therapeutic stays, it's even more important to have goals and a clear roadmap that youth help shape will guide activities and progress towards discharge. The youth plan must be individualized and built around their culture and strengths, validating all parts of their identity and positive areas of their lives. Because youth themselves and their family know the child best, you must let them help make a plan that meets and needs goals. Older youth need life skills and planning to support their transition to adulthood and must be an integral part of their service planning. I think Kate will talk about a single case plan.
Additionally, we know that for both young people involved with juvenile justice or child welfare, that they may have other service plans for the family or as part of their probation. And so the idea is that these plans would really focus on goals for treatment and care while they are in your service, and at the same time align with those plans. And so I know that that had been a topic of conversation in some past provider meetings, and is an area to continue to keep conversation going. But the idea is that those pieces would fit together, and you all would focus specifically on the youth actions while in care, but that those would feed into other plans, which may include the family service plan for DHS managed cases or the single case plan for CUA ones. And now we're going to hear about youth's personal needs. We're going to hear from our friends in PMT.
Meeting my personal needs. Since all of us on this webinar have been teenagers, we know just how important hygiene and food are to a teen. This section details rights that correspond to day-to-day life for youth and placement, including access to food and appropriate clothing. This section is rather straightforward, but we would like to highlight a few of these personal needs. Youth have the right to practice the religion or faith of their choice if they want to, and must not be required to take part in any religious activities. Some youth may have a special diet which must be accommodated for if it is not for a medical, religious, such as halal or kosher or vegetarian reason. Many youth in placement require natural products for their hair and skin. They must be supported in accessing those products that are a part of offering a culturally responsive program. 3 meals a day plus a snack and unlimited water must be available to youth. If they are still hungry after the meal, they can have seconds from a part of the meal that is available. Keeping my money and personal items safe. In our conversations with youth, this section was a highly discussed topic and will also be likely of high interest to the youth at your facility. They emphasize their connection to their personal items and the hurt they feel when items were treated as afterthoughts. As an extension and expression of themselves, their personal items should be respected by providers and all staff members alike. Next slide, please. My money and personal items. Continued. Youth need to know that they have the right to keep all money that they earn or receive and have access to and have information about it. Keep also means to return when they leave. If they are in a juvenile facility, they may owe restitution back to the court, and that should be explained to the youth if that is the case. A youth's personal money is not to be used for a group or for facility use. In box 2, it's pretty self-explanatory, but part of the information sharing with the youth. Box 3, off-site. For youth who are able, particularly dependent youth, having a job is part of normalcy and preparation for adulthood. If having a job is within the youth's goals, you should support them, including discussing ways to make work hours align with facility schedules. Next slide. In box 1, know the rules, how and when a search. So when searches of a youth's physical body and their room or belongings happen, they can be very invasive to a youth. Telling youth the rules and what to expect ahead of time helps them know what could prompt one and potentially how to avoid actions that could lead to a search. In box 2, a reason to look. In line with the protections from unreasonable search and seizure, there must be a valid reason such as a potential danger to youth or others that prompt a search. It's important to consider the threat of the object while searching and should be done in a calm manner. Staff should not purposefully break, lose, or throw away items. In box 3, it talks about if a search does find something banned or unsafe, you need to record what was taken from the youth. If safe, items should be returned to the youth when they leave your facility.
All right, going to school. This section details youth rights around education when they're in placement and are aligned with other efforts to really look at how we can minimize the potential for negative impact on youth school progress as a result of residential placements. Okay, here we go, thanks. And so within these rights, a lot of this is defined by federal education and child welfare law for those relevant placements. And federal law dictates that adults will make the decision collaboratively for youth until they're 18 years of age. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're also giving opportunities for input as well. And then if there's special education involvement, that the local school district will need to be involved as well. But overall, our goal is really to limit, to keep to keep young people in the same school as much as possible. At the same time, we recognize that some young people may come into congregate placement when they've already been unattached from school. And so all of the supports that will come through, at least for child welfare placements from the Education Support Center, will really focus on school stability first, but also making sure that we take the youth input into account. For those providers with on-ground schools, as I've talked with some of you about, we know that state guidance does not allow the connecting of or the assumption that residential care and school placement will be the same. There is a lot of increased emphasis around making intentional individual decisions for youth, even when there is an on-ground school. And then another area that I think is exciting to think about and also reflects national youth input is where are there opportunities to create more access for young people to extracurriculars, opportunities for them to build skills and use their strengths like music and sports. And these are things that ideally could happen in the facility, in a local community, in the youth community, in really a mix of settings. And at the same time, also on the academic front, that young people will get the supports they need to continue to progress towards graduation. That includes all of us who touch youth lives better understanding credit progression for high school, but also making sure that special ed and any other additional academic supports are in place if they need to be.
Staying connected and having my privacy. The youth coming to your care, they have connections that they value and need from their home community. They have the right to stay connected with these family members, close friends, and other kind of supports. Keeping and building ties to their home community and relationships are critical for the well-being and transition home after care. Family members include any personal connections identified by the youth, but should prioritize relationship with any permanency resource and with siblings. Importantly, the youth should know that they have the right to visit in person with family at least once every 2 weeks, if not more frequently. Transportation must be supported by providers to allow these in-person meetings to happen and are ideally back in the youth's own home community. The visits must have social and recreational time, not just for therapy, behavior, or planning discussions. During the COVID crisis, this may need to take the form of virtual visit, consistent with our current policies, but keep in mind that virtual should not take the place of in-person under normal circumstances. The youth have the right to contact family members using the telephone in line with provider policy, personal cell phones or other phone access. These guidelines must be clearly communicated to the youth. A youth has the right to send, receive, and keep their personal mail. It is important to reiterate that staff are not allowed to open or read their youth mail under most cases. Youth needs to feel confident, private information about themselves, and things they share do not become rumor mill. The Youth Right Guide explains that provider staff must uphold confidentiality for physical and mental health records and case notes. Staff need to know and follow privacy laws during their communication. Next slide.
We wanted to point out one statement that appears in the Family Rights Guide regarding the transition out of care. It is a combined role between facility staff and case managers assigned to a youth case to support a successful transition out of care. This will require tailored strategies for working with family members depending on if a youth is in care for dependency, delinquency, or psychiatric needs. One emphasis is on involving and teaching guardians the skills to manage behaviors at home. This involvement and instruction should help the family feel empowered to support their youth as opposed to inducing shame or guilt. At this time, I'd like to ask Melody if there's anything she'd like to add about this section from the family member perspective.
Sure. I lost my thought. I'm sorry. I lost my thought. I don't believe I did this.
Melody, I think you had talked about it a little bit earlier when you said like you didn't even know how to ask for support, how to manage your child when they came home.
Right.
So definitely hinting at needing skill building for families too.
Right. So thank you. Thank you, Lauren.
You're welcome. I know you have a lot to say on this topic.
I know. So one of the things that I have advocated a lot for is the education of the family members or the caregivers of the children. And my experience was at one of the RTFs, I asked the behavioral specialist, I believe, what she was doing with my child. And is there anything she could give me or show me that I could do the same thing at home? And she actually said to me that I was the first parent that had ever asked that question. And from that day on, I realized that we shouldn't have to ask that question. And that goes back to we don't know what we can and cannot ask. But if we don't learn some skills to help our children to manage their behaviors when they come home, it's just going to be a vicious cycle, and they're going to end up back in RTF because after 4 or 5 weeks of perhaps not the consistency and the structure, because the structure is going to be different, our children regress. And so educating family members and caregivers on how to manage behaviors, how to de-escalate, some of the basic skills, we don't have them, we don't know them. And until we have that skill in place, we can't use it. So the children come right back to what they left. We're doing the same things we were doing that weren't working. And so the family structure is never healed, if you want to say, if I could say it that way. So that's extremely important that there's some skill building. And again, educating us on, I wanted to know more about ADHD and ODD and IED and all of the letters, although I said they had to leave room for PhD, but I wanted to know the letters. I wanted to understand the letters. I wanted to, know what I was dealing with. And I had a therapist that came into the home once that told me, the last time she saw us, she said, Melody, I want you to remember that your son is not the problem. The behavior is the problem. And that gave me a whole different lens that I began to look at. And she said, that's what we have to battle. That's what we have to battle, we have to win. And my son even had a different way of looking at things at that point. So those are the kinds of things as parents we need. We need those aha moments that are gonna, make us feel more comfortable when our children come home. Some parents are actually afraid for their children to come home because they just don't know what to expect. And part of the not knowing what to expect, in some cases, is because they haven't had an opportunity to even be around their child while they were away. So, it's a scary situation. We don't want our children to come home the same way they left. The thing that I had to realize is what my son left with, he's bringing it back. Okay, but the promise in my heart was that when he came back, it looked different and it behaved differently. And it had a different way of expressing itself. And in some cases it was, he began to express things differently. He began to talk more than going into a rage, what I called an episode. His anger became articulate when it came to his anger. So he did learn some skills, and he was able to teach me some things, because I would ask him, what did your counselor do when XYZ happened? And he would tell me. And I said, well, how did that feel? It felt okay. Okay, well then I'll do it too. So, but that's, this is one of the, I think, key things for us.
Mhm.
We have to know what to do when our kids come home. We have to know something different, or else we've already lost the battle before they get there.
Thank you for that. I think that's really important. So we're going to move on to health services. Youth health services are a critically important element of residential placement, key to helping our youth stay safe. The Rights Guide clearly lay out guidelines for health services and privacy. One of the earliest requirements at entry to care is completing the written medical assessment of youth health and safety. It must be completed within 24 hours of arrival, followed by a safety plan within the following 24 hours. Times are slightly different for juvenile justice placements. One area to clear up where there was confusion before is around who can approve mental health care for youth between the ages of 14 to 18. If a youth is 14 years or older, they can agree to mental health treatment without the permission of a parent or guardian. However, if they are below 18, a parent, guardian, or doctor can also approve mental health treatment on behalf of the youth, even if the youth doesn't agree. Though youth in care have high and complex needs, they are entitled to protections against disability support and how to manage their health needs as appropriate. Included in health services is access to sexual health information and care appropriate for their age. This includes both education and contraception. Youth also have the right to get tested for sexually transmitted diseases or pregnancy if they need and request them. This type of information is particularly sensitive and private, and all confidentiality requirements apply. I want to ask Melody again if there's anything she'd like to add about health services from the family member perspective.
Sure. I think it's important that, again, family members are informed and given also the opportunity to inform staff on any medical issues that our children have. I think it's important also that if there is some type of situation that's necessary, medically, anything medically necessary, that we need to be definitely informed about it. My son had to be taken, to the dentist because, he had something flare up. But also my son had open heart surgery as a baby, really, at 1.5 years. So I was always concerned, and always had, asked staff to look for different signs. He was doing okay, but I knew to keep an eye on things, and I wanted them to realize, even though he's running up and down the basketball court and it looks like there's nothing wrong with him, that he's doing good, but please keep an eye out for it. Over medicating was not, definitely not. If there's a possible need for our children to be medicated or change the medications, I think it needs to be discussed with the parents. We need to understand what the medication is, what the side effects. My son also had a horrific side effect from one of the medications that has even spilled over now into his adulthood. So, we have to be informed, and the thing is, I don't want providers to ever think that we don't trust them, but we do. I trust your opinions because you are the professional in that area. But along with what I think it's important that you share that information with me so I can know as well. Basically that's it. If treatment is necessary, yes, I want them to get my son to the hospital. But I'm always going to be a phone call away. And actually, I was a car ride away even when my son was all the way up in Erie, Pennsylvania. I drove up there. So, it didn't matter. I was coming. So just let us know, and we can help support whatever may be going on again.
Thanks, Melody. And I think that dovetails really nicely into the next section from the family guide, which is my child's health plan. So the Family Rights Guide also includes a section about health plans titled My Child's Health Plan. Some differences to highlight are the circumstances where parents and guardians are contacted or notified. As part of the initial paperwork at admission, your facility should always ask parents or guardians to approve the facility to provide or arrange routine healthcare visits. Also, part of this discussion should be the role and areas of informed consent for treatment, care, and crisis situations. The Family Rights Guide explains that parents have the right to be updated and continuously involved with decisions about their child's well-being and progress. For example, facilities must attempt to reach parents considering changing a youth's behavioral treatments, medical treatments, or school support. The facility must ask parental or guardian permission before giving a youth previously unapproved treatments like surgery. If the facility cannot get in touch with caregivers, they must get a court order. If it is an emergency situation and waiting would endanger the youth, the facility does not need to ask parental permission, but must notify the parent afterwards.
We can go to the next slide.
Staying safe in crisis. This section is critically important in its fullness, though we will just highlight some of the statements. When reviewing with youth, take the appropriate time and sensitivity to ensure youth feel knowledgeable about the content and have had time to ask questions. Youth have a right to safety in your care, and an area that can easily lead to fear or harm is during the use of restrictive procedures. Sharing this information with youth can help them recognize what may happen and to identify if something was not right during any procedure. Youth need to know that these procedures are not the first try and are not meant to punish but help. When youth's behaviors or emotions escalate, you must first try other strategies to reduce the need for physical or isolating interventions. As the guide mentions, it is your job to teach the youth ways to take care of their feelings or behaviors in healthy ways and to avoid using these procedures entirely. This is a component of the system-wide move towards reducing and eliminating these procedures through research-based practices, such as the 6 core strategies at CBH facilities. You should be told about the 3 types of procedures and the specific times they can or cannot be used, as are described on the charts on the following pages. It is helpful to go over with the youth, again, what type of setting they're in, particularly whether they're in a secure juvenile justice facility, such as the JJSC. Consider crossing out that page if it does not apply to them. Youth need to know that staff must stop when the youth are calm and only use a technique for the shortest time possible. Cannot use to punish or get back at youth, and never ask another youth to use one on them. Though CBH and DHS are expecting and moving towards restraint reduction and elimination, this section and chart are included since they are allowed by Pennsylvania state in last case scenarios. You should be reassured that they must be respected if one is ever used. Restricted procedure chart. So never allowed. The chart starts with never allowed section to teach youth ways to spot major things wrong, as well as a few examples such as twisting ears. Please note the emphasis on telling a youth that they must be able to breathe and are never to be put to the floor or anywhere else in a violent way. Youth should be told that if any of these happen to them, it is breaking their rights and that they should feel safe to report it. Allowed at all facility types. So what is allowed? Manual restraints must only be used in approved and trained manners, with the staff member or type of hold changing every 10 minutes. Youth may be alone in a room to calm down that is large, lit, and has a view outside the room. If in a dependent or RTF placement, this door can never be locked from the outside. And allowed only at a secure facility. Staff should explain this section to youth only if they are in a secure setting. Otherwise, reassure them that it does not apply and none of those items can happen at your facility. Particularly, explain the time limits, including a judge approval for any long stays in isolation, and that their needs must continue to be met. My child's safety. Family members repeatedly shared how they were entrusting their child into your care and how not being there with their child raised their anxieties. This section in their guide emphasizes the requirements of staff, their training, and the types of communication guardians should receive about things happening to or affecting their child. This includes, as soon as possible, notification of abuse allegations, immediate communication about serious reportable incidents, and quick notification if their child is missing off-site. Family members felt knowing their child was off-site without staff knowledge was a key time to partner with parents to help find that child quickly. Choosing the least restrictive safety option. It requires a lot of courage and trust for family members to ask for help and to feel comfortable leaving their child in your care. They expect their child to be safe and may have questions about how the safety will be maintained when behavioral challenges occur. This section emphasizes educating youth with skills for youth self-regulation, and that prevention and response to a behavior needs to happen on a scale of least restrictive needed to keep the situation safe for everyone. Additionally, it informs the parent of their right to help make a restricted procedure plan so they can be part of a mutual decision-making process on the parameters on any use of restricted procedures that are specific to the needs of their child. Guardians express eagerness in being included in these conversations. Again, while the plan outlines safe usage of any procedure for the youth, it should also focus on de-escalating strategies to be used before one is used in ways that avoid restraints and the like altogether.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We're at our last question and answer portion of the meeting today. So I'm going to bring up some questions that we had left over, still unanswered in the chat. There was a question about when will the updated audit tool be available and forwarded? Sounds like this is related to the monitoring. Perhaps this is coming out in the upcoming policy memos or bulletins, but I don't know if DHS or CBH wanted to speak.
For CBH, we don't have a published audit tool, so I think this is probably a DHS specific question. So from DHS's perspective, the tool has already been updated and sent out. It doesn't reflect this new policy. However, we will be reaching out and communicating with all of our provider agencies about how this will be incorporated into our process. For FY21, in all likelihood, we'll just be having conversations and checking to ensure that these have been put into place and being utilized, and it will be incorporated into the FY22 evaluation tool.
Great, thank you. Next question is about the printing of the guide. So it asks that there's not the ability to print mass color copies, and is it sufficient to provide a black and white copy of the guide?
I can't give permission for anything, but I think it's important that the guide be shared, black and white, purple and blue, green and yellow. I know it's, you know, it's in color, it catches you. And but if you're truly going to go over the guide with the parents, guardians, and the youth,
You might have muted yourself there at the end, Melody, but
sorry. Oh, I'm
that's
sorry.
okay.
I think not giving it to them because it's not in color, we're right back where we started. So I would, that's my opinion, and I can't give permission, so. But I just thought I would share that.
And just to add that part of the implementation instructions that will be accompany the online guides kind of give suggestions around outside printing, recommended, you know, Staples or somewhere like that. And the guides will be laid out in a format that would allow you to get it published as a book. Because it will come through as a book, that would be ideal. I know I've spent lots of office time in all sorts of jobs dealing with, you know, paper jams. And so certainly there will be a format you could print page to page, back to back, but there will also be a layout which would allow you to get it externally printed and bound as a book without having to try to sort out the pages on your own.
Great, thank you. I also just popped into the chat. Everyone should have received the links to those documents. There was a question again in the chat about where those would be located. And then we have two questions related to the time frames for implementation. again, which involves the staff training. When is that to be completed if a date was shared?
I did not share a date for CBH. I believe it's going to say February 15th for all staff to be trained. Although you will have to train some staff in advance to start implementing January 15th, but that will be in the bulletin, which will be in CBH News tomorrow.
Great, thank you. We have a question that asks, will probation officers be responsible for also ensuring the parents and families have these guides? So I think that's a question for DHS.
So we do have support in follow-up on the court side to also do a similar presentation with JPO, so similar to KUA, that they'll know to look for it. But in relation to that question, as well as some other previous conversations about, is this the first time youth ever hear about their rights? Just to know that there are still expectations that the youth will receive the DHS templates on rights and care when they do come into care. And so they will get some basic rights information. But the reason this one really needs to be shared at the provider level is it is residential provider requirements. And so I'm not sure for JPOs if they have a similar kind of general rights and care document, but at least on the child welfare side, we know that young people will still receive the DHS templates about rights and in care on the case management side. And that we're also following up with the Taskforce partners who work with probation, and they'll also be doing presentations. So they similarly will hear about this and know that they should be on the lookout for it.
And I wanted to add that yes, the juvenile center does have their own guides, and they are to continue using those in addition to the new guides that we're expediting. But it's a collaboration. At the end of the day, also, of course, we can, in terms of DHS policy, make the probation responsible, but we're making our Department of Social Work admissions at the center, the juvenile center, and subcontractors responsible to provide this guide to the youth.
Great, thank you. We had a quick one from the previously. Is this relative to supervised independent living youth? The guides, do they apply to supervised independent living youth?
I guess I can answer that too. As you know, supervised SIL, it's a different level of care. This is not congregate. So it would not apply directly. However, again, they still are supposed to get their care grievance formats for the SIL as well.
And as it relates to the education items, those would still be relevant to SIL, but a lot of the things, because they do come from the 3,800 residential regs, you know, there may be some areas that may be valuable for you all to use that as a tool if you wanted to. But a lot of because they're licensed different, because so many of the rights come from licensing, if that's not your licensing, some of that may not be relevant. But as Louise said, there's still general protections for care. And then all of the education requirements are, you know, just federal law. So those would be relevant.
Great, thank you. Another question, how do you suggest we proceed if family members aren't there at admission? How should we review and capture their signatures?
On the DHS side, the implementation guidance specifies steps to take after that. There's like 2 phone calls and attempts and documented attempts to contact, as well as instructions on mailing. So on the DHS side, you will see more details of that in the policy, and CBH can share for their side.
Yeah, I mean, definitely need to document attempts to review. If it's reviewed by phone, document that it's reviewed by phone. And then, you know, I would assume that you will have some in-person contact with a parent or guardian at some point during the course of treatment, especially if children are going home for home time or families are coming up for family therapy sessions. And so as soon as possible to get it physically in their hands, I would also do that and document.
Thank you. And then I think the last one we have time for today, but we will also follow up with a frequently asked question sheet that lists out all of the questions answered, as well as you have some time to email us questions after today if you have further things you'd like to understand about the guides. But last question, is there a specific training curriculum that you expect providers to use when training our staff on these new guides?
CBH doesn't have a specific curriculum. I think we've highlighted really important sections during this training, so we hope that that's been reiterated. But there isn't a specific curriculum. I do believe this is recorded though, Victoria, so it's also possible for you to use this recording in a part of your training as well.
Yes, it's recorded and it will be shared with everyone. I think that's also one hope of the use of this webinar today, that it could be used with your helping to train your staff. All right, Caroline, you can go to the next slide, please. So again, just as we wrap up, we appreciate everyone being a part of the webinar today and taking your time. Just as we leave today, if you take a moment to just kind of recap and reflect on what you learned, some things that were new to you, something that you already knew, as well as things you might have questions about still. Again, you can submit questions after this and they will be answered in a follow-up document. Caroline, can you switch to the next slide so everyone, this will be the email address if you have any further questions. Again, we really appreciate everyone's time and consideration and partnership in implementing these new right guides. Hope you have a great rest of your day.